Hi, everyone, and welcome to Legal Management Talk, the official podcast of the Association of Legal Administrators. I'm your host, Justin Eskenazi. So today we have a very special episode. Of course, diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility is a big part of our focus here at ALA. And in conjunction with that, we have a special issue of legal management coming out this month all about DEIA. And that is also the focus of this podcast episode. So you're going to see ALA's Executive Director, Eryn Carter. She'll be interviewing Darwin Conner, who is the Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer at Eversheds Sutherland. And not only are they both involved in the legal industry, but they are actually friends from college. So you will hear them talking about things like mentoring, DEIA policies, trends, how administrators should approach DEIA at their firms, along with a little bit of reminiscing along the way. So here is Eryn and Darwin.
Well, welcome, Darwin, to the Legal Management Talk ALA podcast. It's so great to have you. This has been a couple years in the making. So happy to finally have you on our podcast.
No, thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah. So when I joined ALA almost 4 years ago, this is my first position in the legal industry. I was like, okay, who do I know in legal? And you were the first one on my list. And so just again, almost 4 years of kind of marching through, looking for opportunities for us to get together, and we finally making it happen. So thanks again. So let's jump in. I want our audience to know kind of a little bit about the two of us and our background. We're not just kind of colleagues in the legal space, but we've known each other for about 3 decades. Can you believe that? So I have a little picture. I had to dig into the crate because this was pre-digital photos and all of that. But here's a picture of us. I kind of blurred out a friend of ours in the middle, so to protect the innocent. So this is you and me. Back in the early 90-ish period. Can you believe it? I found one with your stash.
Hey, look at all that hair. Look at all that hair.
On your face and on your head, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
Okay. Yeah. Back in our younger days. So that's how far back we go. So we're really good friends, and but I'm glad that we're connected on this front. So let's get started. So you have a pretty big job. And I want to kind of get started with kind of doing a kind of a level set question. So how would you define, or what would you say DEI means in the moment?
Yeah, it's a great question to start with, because I think there are a lot of misconceptions about what the work consists of, right? And some of it, I think, it has been intentionally mischaracterized, right? So since there's so much confusion about what the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion consists of, a lot of the attacks on the work attempt to conflate things like affirmative action, quotas, and identity-based preferences with the term DEI. And you may have, obviously, everybody's heard of the rise of the use of the term DEI hire, which really isn't a thing. So the attempt to define DEI as something it is not really leverages people's ignorance and fears about what the work actually is. I think it makes sense to discuss what that work consists of, and maybe more importantly, what it does not, right? Mm-hmm. So let's start with what DEI isn't. It's not quotas and set-asides. It's not preferences when it comes to hiring, compensation, and promotion. And it's really not based in this loss of opportunity that springs from membership in a dominant group, right? So if you're in a dominant group, the work of DEI doesn't mean you lose opportunity. Mm-hmm. What the work of DEI actually consists of, right? And I like to break it down by each of the words, right? So diversity is really just a descriptive word of who we are. It's a demographic-based definition, and sometimes aspirational, which consists of an understanding of the different identities that make up who we are, but can also include a goal to have a workforce eventually reflect the demographic makeup of our country, mm-hmm. or in the workplace, a specific workplace, the industry in which you sit. the word equity really kind of can encompass all of the work. And it really means the removal of identity-based barriers to opportunity, whether at the personal or institutional level. And inclusion is just the creation of an environment that is not just focused on the dominant group, but embraces and celebrates people of all identities and is inclusive of those identities in leadership and decision-making. So once you understand what the work actually consists of and when people are educated about it, people aren't against it, right? Because it's not about, let's take this group and give them opportunities that we're not giving to another group.
Right. Well, thank you for that. I think our audience would appreciate having that level of specificity, given towards the definition of the terms. So I'm going to shift and talk about policies or ask you about policies. So there seems to be a mindset that there's no need for DEI policies and that firms are moving forward on the basis of merit alone. What's your thinking on that? Is that accurate? Is that an accurate representation about where the legal industry is right now?
Yeah, so this is a really big issue, right? And I think you really have to approach the issue or the question with another question. And what do you mean by merit, right? So if you're at a firm that has a partnership made up of 70% of people who fall into one demographic category, and you have tons of referrals to bring others in, what do you think the outcomes will be when it comes to opportunity and hiring, right? If that's your definition of merit, then your definition of merit is incorrect. And I think people tend to believe that referrals are always meritorious. I think the right way to ask the question is, how can you possibly have a merit-based system if you're not truly looking at a diverse slate of candidates, right? And I have a really good example when it comes to this.
Yeah, please.
At another firm, we wanted to bring in a number of candidates. We were trying to fill a partner position in a specific practice group. And we wanted to look at, the best candidates that we could possibly find. We went to our typical headhunter. They brought in a slate of impressive candidates, but none of which we wanted to hire. And they were all, white men. So we went back to the headhunter. We were like, hey, can we, why did you bring us nothing but one type of specific identity when we're looking to fill this role, right? Most people stop and say, okay, well, these are the people who are most qualified for the position that headhunter brought. After being confronted with the question, the headhunter was like, oh, I didn't know you wanted diverse, candidates. You didn't want, and went out and brought back a whole nother slate, which was diverse in all the ways. And the candidates we saw were more qualified than the ones they brought in the first time. And we were like, what, why do we have to ask this question? If we're asking you to bring us the most qualified candidates, right? You have to look at a broad scope of talent, identities, and we want the best, right? So you have to really be intentional about it. And this headhunter was like, well, I didn't know that was important to you. So only focus on the relationships that they already had instead of going out and actually looking for the best possible candidates. So that's always a good example to talk about.
So in that particular example, I think, there's two sides of this, right? The firm may not have expressed that as a priority, right? And then conversely, the recruiter, the headhunter, didn't identify that as may not have been part of their usual protocol, right? So when firms are actively recruiting and they're using outside resources, headhunters and various recruiters, like, what should that conversation be? So that you don't have to go through this step of having a pool presented and then they don't represent the needs or what the firm might be seeking.
I think what's important to remember is people tend to choose the easiest path, right? So as a firm, you should look at your slate of headhunters or the headhunters you use and actually, use all the headhunters that you typically use, but also find headhunters who may find talent in places that your typical headhunters do not.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you present the opportunity, you say, listen, at this firm, we understand that, a bunch of different identities can bring different qualities to the position or to the, the practice group or whatever you're hiring for. So we want to see a broad scope of talent, including underrepresented talent. You have to be intentional about making that clear. Otherwise, it's always the path of least resistance. And if your headhunters, right, are of one identity or have connections with people of a specific identity, that's what you're going to get.
Mm-hmm. And so with regard, that makes tons of sense. And so with regard to policies, what's your thinking about having something institutional within the firm that articulates that? Is that an imperative? Is that kind of a nice to have? Or, where does policy fit into all of these things?
So I think it's more important to focus on the people who are implementing the policies, right? So if you're looking at recruiting, for example, if you hire people who understand the value of diversity and how to bring in a broad slate of talent, right? The policy can be neutral, but the outcomes will be beneficial, right? Because those people understand how to maximize the scope of talent within the policy that you've written.
Right.
So putting people in place, training people who understand the value of diversity, equity, inclusion, and how it fits into whatever role they are responsible for is really, really very important. And that could be seen as a policy, but it's really more about training and understanding how to implement the policy in a way that's fair.
Okay, so we talked about hiring, right? So you've brought new hires into the firm, and so now we're going to switch to mentorship. So ALA has done some research amongst our members, and what that is telling us is that we found that there's a lack of it. Our members are saying there's a lack of intentionality regarding mentorship in order to support underrepresented groups in their career growth. What role does mentorship play in terms of ensuring or trying to help ensure that they're successful?
Yeah, so this is a big question, right? So I think it plays a big role, but first we need to talk about mentorship and sponsorship, right? I think both can affect inclusion. Mentors give you advice on how to navigate the space you inhabit for you to create your own success, and sponsors mentor, but also provide opportunity and advocate for you in rooms to which you may not have access, right? I think organizations take different approaches to mentoring programs, structured mentoring programs, and I've been part of quite a few, and I've led a few. And mentorship tends to be both structural and informal, right? So a good structured program is very intentional about matching people based on personality type. I think it's really important that you understand the personality type of the mentor and the personality type of the mentee. This is incredibly difficult and takes a deep knowledge base of the people involved on both sides, right? So when you talk about intentionality, I think that's what you're talking about. The programs that are built based on a luck of the draw approach, in my opinion, are rarely successful. And as a result, it's often seen as a chore from one or both sides, right? Like getting together feels like a chore and something you're doing because you're part of a structured program. I think the days of identity-focused mentorship programs have passed because they're seen as providing a benefit to someone based on their identity, even though they're really built to counter the informal mentorship relationships that form kind of organically. I think this is sad because the fact that structured identity-based mentorship programs form in the first place, as I just said, is because mentor-mentee relationships that happen organically tend to happen within the same identity-based groups. If I see myself in you, I want to go out of my way to help. And in spaces where underrepresented groups exist, that often means those people are overlooked.
Right.
But let's turn to sponsorship for a second.
Yeah.
Sponsorship is almost always organic, and the same issues apply to any non-structured sponsorship relationship. And this is where I tend to bristle because organic sponsorship relationships that quite often fall along identity lines are looked at as merit-based, right? There's that word again. Equity, as we said earlier, is removing identity-based barriers. So if decision makers and those with power gravitate to those they see themselves in, that means opportunity is being denied to those who they don't see themselves in, right?
Right.
So my advice to young attorneys and business professionals is always to find the people who have either big books of business or who run departments, and to make themselves indispensable to those people by doing amazing work. And then you will find that you may have a sponsored, right?
Right.
The idea of a structured sponsorship program has all but evaporated under the current environment. But when you talk about that intentionality, it's really about trying to fight that tendency to, gravitate towards someone, whether you're a mentor or a sponsor, that you see yourself in, right? It's a natural tendency to do. And that often means in spaces where there are underrepresented groups, but they're being left out.
Yeah. So whether it's mentorship or sponsorship, how can firms begin to take a look at putting DEI or making DEI a higher priority in providing these kinds of opportunities? Because if you look at sponsorship, right, like you said, it's more organic, right? I have a big book of business. I'm a big rainmaker in a practice group, and someone comes to me and wants my help, wants my guidance, advice, etc. But that individual may not have that sensibility. They're too busy. They've got a lot of people clamoring for their attention. They got to keep making it rain. So how does all of this fit in? And so in order for it to be prioritized, in order for that individual who is perhaps the more junior person to find that space and to find that the additional help and support that they're looking for?
Yeah, so if you're trying to figure out how best to set up relationships with that type of sponsorship, you have to look at your assignment programs, right? A lot of firms have a very entrepreneurial approach to how associates get work, right? Which means you go out and you talk to people, and if you're from I remember when I was an associate, I always felt terrified going into the big partner's office and asking for work. And I think, people who didn't have my identity maybe felt more comfortable doing that, right? So you have to look at how work is handed out. You have to monitor who is getting work and who isn't getting work. And then you have to actively step in and say, hey, we have all of this talent. Why aren't you giving them an opportunity? Or you need to structure something so that you give the exposure to the decision makers for your younger talent, so they have the opportunity to prove themselves and get in front of those people.
That's great. So ALA's audience, ALA's members are primarily legal administrators. And so they are a significant part of the legal ecosystem. What would you say is their role in helping to promote and support DEI in their firms?
Yeah, so I think there are two approaches. There's kind of the structured approach, and then kind of what you need to do as a professional in your role, right? So a structured approach is you really need to be educating all the people at the firm about DEI topics, about culture, about bringing people in and making a space that is truly inclusive, in which opportunity is there for everyone.
Yeah.
On a personal note, or at the personal level, I should say, I think you really need to understand where the issues are at the firm, right? So, as an example, there are firms that feature people externally, right? From a business development standpoint, they have amazing people who are subject matter experts who go out and talk about, whatever the current issue is publicly, or with reporters or whatever it is.
Yeah.
If you take a look at who those people are, and it's the same identity every time, right?
Mm-hmm.
The outcomes are going to be the outcome, the same outcomes over and over again.
Right.
If you say, wait a second, let's try to diversify our slate of subject matter experts and give them all opportunities to be the face of the firm and to talk about their expertise externally, right? That brings opportunity, right? So you need to understand, and right, like once again, I said the path of least resistance is, oh, we always use this person. They're very good in front of the camera.
Right.
Train the people who may not be as good in front of the camera so that they are prepared to step into that role, and they become an option, right?
Right.
That's one example. From a business development standpoint, you have to understand where the opportunity lies. Maybe you spend some more money on sponsoring, diverse organizations outside of the firm, or affinity groups, or, ABA groups, or whatever it is, so that people are exposed to other avenues of bringing business in that may be focused on their identity.
Right.
You have to really, really understand more than just what you've always done. You have to broaden your own scope and understanding of where the opportunity lies and how to get people involved.
Yeah.
Right? It's an active thing,
Yeah.
which makes sense at a law firm because everybody has a practice. You've never perfected it. You're always practicing.
Yeah.
So administrators should look at it that way
Yeah.
as well, I think.
So what if they run into a brick wall? They've been put in this position to promote and expand DEI efforts in the firm, but they're just not getting traction. What advice would you have for them when they're approaching their managing partner or the management committee to express their need and to express perhaps what the firm might need to change?
Yeah. So I think, one, you talk about retention. And if you have talent, right, it's expensive to lose people. It's expensive to replace people. So if you're bringing in talent and they aren't being given the opportunity, then you're going to lose that talent. You have to replace them. That costs money. Also, find your champions when it comes to who the clients are, right? Clients have expectations. We've all read the McKinsey study on diversity and how it yields better outcomes because there are different ideas and different approaches. Clients believe that. I've reviewed, I don't know how many outside counsel guidelines. Obviously, they've changed a bit during the current environment. But the expectation is that they want a diverse team. At least quite a few clients would like a diverse teams because they believe, and it's backed by these studies, that they will get better outcomes, right? So understanding that and then pointing out to the decision makers that our clients want this stuff and they are looking for it and they expect it is often very convincing. The challenge is, I've talked to a number of clients who have said, listen, we won't give you work.
Yeah.
And we're not going to tell you why. If your teams are all, homogenous, we just won't call you. Right. And it's very hard to prove a negative.
Yeah.
But if that is front of mind for decision makers and partners, especially, you're losing out on work because you're not presenting, a diverse team, the diverse team that the client is expecting. That may change minds as well. So there's always a case, and often, especially at law firms, it boils down to the business case.
So let's talk trends, right? So what DEI trends are you seeing firms, would you say that firms should be focusing on in the coming months or years?
So this is an interesting question, right? Because there were tons of trends, and then under the current environment, like a lot of people are just trying to hold on to what they have, right?
Right.
I think a really interesting trend that I've seen is diversity professionals. And if you're a diversity professional law firm, you have to understand how every single system works, from recruiting to professional development to business development, right? Because you get questions and you're asked about, well, how is this and how is this affecting me? You really have to understand how all those systems work. And there is a trend, and it's not an overwhelming trend, but for diversity professionals to move into talent development roles or business development roles, because they have that understanding and can build the systems and structures in a way that really is fair. And they can keep an eye out for things that may result in, non-inclusive results, and then attack those things or change the systems, right? So that you get fair outcomes.
Yeah. So what are firms leaning into now in the current environment, would you say?
Like it depends on the firm, right? It depends on the firm. I think right now,
What are you
firms are
hearing?
really lean. Yeah, it's about inclusion, right? So,
Yeah.
As you know, from the dawn of time, whatever word is in vogue at the moment can be turned into a weapon, right? So it used to be, politically correct, and then that was weaponized, and then and now diversity, equity, inclusion has been weaponized. But the word inclusion is hard to weaponize. It just means making sure that everybody is included. So I think a lot of what people are leaning into is building inclusive environments and making sure that you're not using non-inclusive language. You're being inclusive and intentional when it comes to including people in opportunity, whether it's recruiting based or if you're handing someone work, or if you have a kind of an intentional succession planning model, right? Often partners will hand, when they're retiring, they'll hand their book of business off to someone who they are very close to. And if firms can look at those and be like, well, these are institutional clients, so let's figure out who's doing the work and whether or not there are opportunities here that we can take a look at and make sure that there is a more fair approach to this. So I think it's about thinking about things in the most inclusive way, and that's it's the same work, but you're just using different types of language to make sure that people aren't offended by a word that's been weaponized.
Yeah, that's totally understandable. And so you talked a little bit about client expectations. If we're looking internally at law firms, what are employees' expectations around the EIA in this day and age?
Yeah, so it's interesting you say that, because when I first got to my current firm, one of the things I really wanted to do was to build the DEI program so that it is inclusive of business professionals. And I think a lot of firms that still really just focus on the attorneys.
Yeah.
But making sure that your administrators and your business professionals are included in the work of DEI and they have the support systems really means that they feel like they are part of the firm and part of the goals of the firm, but also are being taken care of and listened to and included in ways that will help them be more invested in the success of your organization. So, we have affinity groups for our business professionals, which is something we started. A lot of firms don't have that function, and we try to make sure that everybody is talking to everyone else, as opposed to having this kind of bifurcated, the lawyers over here and the business professionals over here, and their only role is supporting the attorneys, right? It's more of a, let's look at this holistically and how we can grow this firm successfully by making sure that everybody is taken care of. So I think it's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. So last question. So get out your crystal ball.
Oh, no.
And I'm going to ask you to make some predictions or give us your thoughts on what you think the future of DEI will look like. Let's just say after our retirement, like what would you say it might look like, or maybe even should look like?
So, just based on demographic trends, right? Numbers are going to increase when it comes to people who find themselves in underrepresented groups now. So hopefully there's an organic change that occurs based on those demographic numbers changing over time.
Yeah.
I think there's a real hesitancy right now when it comes to doing the work of diversity, equity, inclusion, and what is okay to do, because there's I think some intentional mischaracterization of what the work is. So people are, it's a hot button issue. I think that will eventually subside, so that people understand that this work isn't something that is, providing a bunch of preferences or gifts to people. So once that happens, then it'll be easier to do the work of diversity, equity, inclusion. But in terms of where the work is going, I think that trend we talked about earlier of diversity professionals becoming integral or taking on bigger roles in different areas. You're not going to be looking at diversity professionals as something that is, kind of a specific expertise, but understanding how much diversity professionals know about a firm's organization and structure and how they can help in other areas, so that, you can build systems that are actually fair for everyone. So I think that's where we're going to be headed. I think the words diversity and equity, I don't know if they're going to come back. I think it's going to be more of an inclusion and a belonging based, but there really is no difference in terms of what the work means. Right. So I think that's where we're going to be.
Well, that's encouraging. It's optimistic.
You do this work, you have to be optimistic.
But it's also going to be a lot of work, right? So between the now and the time that we retire, a lot of work still has to be done. And so we need people like you in the trenches doing that work. So thank you, Darwin.
I'm here.
Yes.
We need people like you, as well. It's really important.
Well, thank you, Darwin, for joining us on our podcast. Really appreciate it. It was a lot of fun and look forward to our next conversation, hopefully.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to see you as always.
Same here. Thanks again.
A big thank you to Eryn and Darwin for a great conversation. And thank you to all of our listeners, viewers, subscribers for tuning in. Please be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. And you can find Legal Management Talk wherever you get your podcasts. And as always, you can learn more about ALA at alanet.org. Until next time.